$62 million. The numbers printed on the flimsy slip of thermal paper seemed to dance before my eyes, mocking reality. $62 million. It was enough to buy an island, a fleet of jets, or in my case, a brand new life. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The early morning sun of Chicago filtered through the blinds, illuminating dust motes that suddenly looked like gold dust. I grabbed my 4-year-old son, Leo, who was happily smashing his toy trucks together on the linoleum floor. I didn't even bother to put on his jacket. I just wrapped him in a blanket, my hands trembling so violently I could barely turn the doorknob. I had to tell Marcus, my husband, the man I had loved since I was 19, the father of my child. This was it. The struggling was over, the late nights, the unpaid bills, the silent tension that had suffocated our marriage for the last 2 years. It was all over. I drove toward the Loop, the downtown district where Marcus's architectural firm, Skyline Designs, had its office. My mind was racing faster than the car. I imagined his face. I imagined the relief washing over him, the way his shoulders would drop, the way he would pull me into a hug and bury his face in my neck, crying tears of joy. We would be a family again. A real family, unburdened by the crushing weight of financial stress. I parked the car haphazardly in the garage, scooped Leo up, and practically ran toward the elevator. The receptionist, a sweet girl named Sarah, wasn't at her desk. The office was strangely quiet for a Tuesday morning. I navigated the hallway toward the executive suite at the back. The heavy mahogany door to Marcus's office was slightly ajar. I raised my hand to knock, a grin stretching across my face so wide it hurt. But then, a sound stopped me cold. It was a laugh. Not a business laugh, not a polite chuckle. It was a low, throaty, intimate laugh, a woman's laugh. And then I heard his voice. The voice I woke up to every morning. The voice that had whispered vows to me at the altar. "You really are bad, Vanessa. What if she walks in?" "Let her," the woman purred. I recognized that voice instantly. Vanessa, the interior designer Marcus had hired 6 months ago. The woman who had come to our house for dinner, who had complimented my pot roast, who had smiled at my son. "She won't walk in," Marcus said, his voice dripping with a casual cruelty that made my stomach lurch. "Elena is probably at home scrubbing the floors or clipping coupons. That's all she's good for. She has no ambition, no fire. She's just plain. A plain housewife who thinks the world revolves around grocery lists." I froze. The lottery ticket in my pocket suddenly felt heavy, like a lead weight. My hand hovered in the air, paralyzed. Leo shifted in my arms, and I instinctively pressed his face into my shoulder to muffle any sound he might make. "So, when are you going to do it?" Vanessa asked. I could hear the rustle of fabric, the clink of glass. "Soon," Marcus replied. "I've been setting it up for months. I've convinced her the company is drowning in debt. I told her we're on the verge of bankruptcy. I've even moved the assets to the shell company in my dad's name. When I file for divorce next week, on paper, I'll be destitute. She'll be so terrified of the debt that she'll sign whatever I put in front of her just to get away. She'll leave with nothing, not a dime, and I'll be free of her and that suffocating domestic life." "And the kid?" Vanessa asked, her tone indifferent. "Leo?" Marcus sighed, a sound of annoyance rather than paternal affection. "He's a mama's boy. He can stay with her. Once I'm established with you, maybe I'll come back for him if I feel like playing dad. But right now, he's just baggage. Baggage. My son. Our son. Baggage." The world didn't spin. It didn't go black. Instead, everything snapped into a terrifyingly sharp focus. The hallway carpet, the smell of stale coffee and expensive perfume, the muffled sounds of traffic outside it all became hyper-real. The $62 million ticket burned against my hip. A minute ago, I was rushing here to save him. Now, I realized I needed to save myself. I didn't burst in. I didn't scream. I didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing the plain housewife break down. I slowly, silently, lowered my hand. I turned around, clutching Leo so tight he squirmed, and I walked away. I walked past the empty reception desk, down the elevator, and back to my car. I sat in the driver's seat. staring at the gray concrete wall of the parking garage. A scream was building in my throat, a primal, jagged thing, but I swallowed it down. I looked at Leo in the rearview mirror. He was looking back at me with wide, innocent brown eyes. "Mommy, are we seeing Daddy?" he asked. "No, baby," I whispered, my voice trembling only slightly. "Daddy is busy. We're going on a trip." That day, the old Elena died. The Elena who believed in unconditional love, who sacrificed her career to be a mother, who wore thrift store clothes so her husband could wear designer suits. She died in that parking garage. And from her ashes, something cold and hard began to form. I drove straight to the bank, but not our joint bank. I went to a credit union 3 towns over. I opened a safe deposit box and placed the lottery ticket inside. I didn't claim it yet. In the state of Illinois, you could claim anonymity, but I needed a trust. I needed lawyers, and most importantly, I needed to be divorced before that money hit any account with my name on it. If I claimed it now, Marcus would be entitled to half, $31 million to the man who called our son baggage. Over my dead body. I went home and packed a bag. When Marcus came home that night, I was sitting on the couch, wearing my oldest sweatpants, looking red-eyed and exhausted. He walked in, smelling of Vanessa's perfume masked by a heavy dose of breath mints. "Hey," he said, loosening his tie. "Rough day?" I looked up at him. It took every ounce of strength I possessed not to claw his eyes out. Instead, I let my chin tremble. "Marcus, I'm so sorry. I think I'm coming down with the flu. And Leo has been fussy all day. I think I need to go to my mom's in Wisconsin for a few days, just to get some help and rest so I don't get you sick." Marcus hid his smile, but I saw it. It was in the crinkle of his eyes. He was relieved. He wanted me gone so he could bring Vanessa here. "Yeah, that's probably a good idea," he said, feigning concern. "You look terrible, Elle. Go rest. I'll hold down the fort here." I left the next morning. My mother, a retired school teacher with a spine of steel, lived in a small cottage in Madison. When I arrived, I didn't cry. I sat her down at her kitchen table and told her everything. I told her about the lottery. I told her about the affair. I told her about the plan to leave me with nothing. My mother didn't scream. She didn't wail. She stood up, walked to the stove, put the kettle on, and turned to me. "Okay," she said. "What do we do?" "We wait," I said. "We play his game. He wants me to think we're broke? Fine. I'll be the poorest, most pathetic woman he's ever seen." I stayed in Wisconsin for 3 days, finalizing the plan in my head. When I returned to Chicago, I began the performance of a lifetime. I cut coupons at the kitchen table while he watched. I served tuna casserole 3 nights in a row. I turned off the lights to save electricity. I became exactly who he thought I was, a scared, small woman terrified of the financial ruin he had invented. One evening, Marcus sat me down. He looked grave. "Elena, we need to talk," he said. "The business. It's worse than I thought. We might lose the house." I gasped, covering my mouth with my hands. "Oh no, Marcus, what are we going to do?" "I don't know," he sighed. "I need cash. Liquid cash. Do you still have that rainy day fund? The one your grandmother left you?" He was talking about the $10,000 my grandmother had left me in her will. It was the only money I had in my own name. I looked at him, tears welling in my eyes. "Marcus, I don't have it." His face darkened. "What do you mean you don't have it?" "I spent it," I sobbed. "I bought a life insurance policy for Leo. A whole life policy. I put it all in a lump sum payment. I thought, if something happened to us, he needed to be protected." It was a lie. I had moved that money to a secret account my mother had opened for me, but Marcus didn't know that. "You idiot!" he shouted, standing up and kicking the coffee table. "You stupid woman! That money could have saved the firm. Now it's locked up in some useless policy?" "I'm sorry," I wailed, shrinking into the sofa. "I just wanted to be a good mother." He glared at me with pure disgust. "You're useless, Elena. Absolutely useless." He stormed out of the house. I knew where he was going. He was going to Vanessa. I stopped crying the second the door slammed. I walked to the window and watched his taillights fade. Good. Let him think I'm broke. Let him think I've cut off my own lifeline. The next phase of my plan required me to get inside Skyline Designs. I needed proof, hard proof, not just of the affair, but of the financial fraud he had bragged about. I needed to know where the money was really going. A week later, I approached him with breakfast in bed. "Marcus," I said softly, "I want to help. I know I can't do much, but let me come to the office. I can clean, I can answer phones, I can organize files. I won't take a salary. Just let me help save the company." He looked at me over his coffee cup. I could see the wheels turning. Free labor, and a way to humiliate me further. "Fine," he grunted, "but you stay out of the way, and don't dress like a slob." I arrived at Skyline Designs on a Monday. I wore a faded gray skirt and a blouse that was 2 seasons out of date. Vanessa was there, sitting at her glass desk, looking radiant in a red silk dress. When she saw me, she smirked. "Oh, look who it is," she said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "The little wife comes to help. Here, take this trash out, would you?" She handed me her wastebasket. I took it. I lowered my head and took her trash. I made coffee for everyone. I scrubbed the break room microwave. I endured their snide comments, their shared glances, their laughter when they thought I wasn't listening. I became invisible. But the thing about being invisible is that you see everything. I noticed that the head accountant, a stern woman named Mrs. Higgins, was always stressed. She was a woman in her 60s who had been with the firm since Marcus's father started it. She was loyal, but I could see the cracks. Vanessa treated her like a servant, snapping her fingers at her to demand checks. Marcus ignored her warnings about cash flow. I started bringing Mrs. Higgins tea. I asked about her grandchildren. I learned that her husband was sick and the medical bills were piling up. I saw her eating a meager sandwich for lunch every day. One afternoon, I sat next to her in the break room. "It's hard, isn't it?" I whispered. "Watching them spend money while we worry about pennies?" Mrs. Higgins looked at me, surprised. She adjusted her glasses. "You have no idea, my dear. If you saw the books," she trailed off, realizing she had said too much. I leaned in closer. "I know about the shell company, Mrs. Higgins. I know about the fake debt." Her face went pale. "How?" I heard him. "But I need proof. If he goes down, he's going to take you with him. He'll blame the accounting department. He'll say you cooked the books." She trembled. He wouldn't. "He calls his own son baggage. Mrs. Higgins, what do you think you are to him?" She stared at her sandwich for a long time. Then she looked up, and I saw a flicker of defiance in her tired eyes. "The password to the encrypted server is his birthday backwards, followed by Vanessa's initials. The file is labeled Project Alpha." I squeezed her hand. "Thank you." I waited for my moment. It came 2 days later during a severe thunderstorm. The lights in the office flickered. I knew the servers would be rebooting. Marcus and Vanessa had left early for a client dinner. I stayed behind, claiming I needed to finish organizing the archive room. I sat at Marcus's computer. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would trigger an alarm. I typed in the password. Access granted. I found the folder, Project Alpha. It was all there. Millions of dollars diverted to a company called Titan Holdings, fake invoices from suppliers that didn't exist, tax evasion on a massive scale. The company wasn't broke. It was more profitable than ever. But Marcus was siphoning everything off to hide it from me. I inserted a USB drive. The progress bar crawled across the screen. 10%, 40%, 70%. I heard the elevator ding. Someone was coming back. I panicked. I pulled the drive out just as it hit 100%. I shoved it into my bra. The door to the office opened. It was the janitor, an old man named Earl. "Working late, Mrs. Elena?" he asked kindly. I let out a breath that sounded like a sob. "Yes, Earl, just finishing up." I walked out into the rain, the USB drive warm against my skin. I had the smoking gun. Now, I needed the ammunition to fire it. I couldn't file for divorce yet. I needed to destroy his safety net first. I needed an ally who knew the industry. I remembered a name Marcus had mentioned years ago with hatred, David Thorne. David had been Marcus's partner when the firm first started. Marcus had forced him out in a hostile takeover, stealing David's designs and ruining his reputation. Marcus laughed about it often, calling David a talented loser. I hired a private investigator to find him. David was running a small metal fabrication shop on the south side of Chicago. It was a dusty, gritty place, far removed from the glass towers of downtown. I drove there in my beat-up sedan. I walked into the shop, the smell of ozone and welding fumes hitting me instantly. A man in his early 40s was working at a lathe. He looked rough, unshaven, wearing grease-stained coveralls, but his eyes were sharp. "David Thorne?" I asked. He turned off the machine and looked at me suspiciously. "Who's asking?" "My name is Elena. I'm Marcus's wife." His expression hardened. "Get out. I don't want anything to do with that snake or anyone connected to him." "I'm not here on his behalf," I said, standing my ground. "I'm here because he's trying to destroy me, just like he destroyed you. And I have a proposition." David laughed, a bitter, barking sound. "What kind of proposition? You look like you don't have 2 nickels to rub together." I reached into my bag and pulled out a bank statement. It wasn't the lottery money that was still hidden. It was a statement from the trust my mother had set up, showing the initial deposit of the lottery winnings which we had finally claimed through a blind trust. $62 million. David's eyes widened. He looked from the paper to me, then back to the paper. "Is this real?" "It's real," I said. "And I want to invest. I want to build a new firm. A firm that will crush Skyline Designs into dust. I have the capital, you have the talent, and we both have the hatred. Are you in?" David looked at me for a long, silent minute. He saw the fire in my eyes, the cold resolve that had replaced the weeping housewife. He wiped his hand on a rag and extended it to me. "When do we start?" We started immediately. We created a company called Vanguard Dynamics. I remained a silent partner, the invisible investor. David was the face. With my funding, we didn't just open a shop. We built a state-of-the-art facility. We poached Marcus's best architects by offering them double their salaries. We undercut his bids on major city contracts because we didn't need the immediate profit. I watched from the shadows as Marcus's empire began to crumble. He came home every night looking more and more haggard. "They're undercutting us on everything," he screamed one night, throwing his briefcase across the room. "Who is this Vanguard Dynamics? Where did they come from?" I sat on the couch, darning a sock, fighting back a smile. "I don't know, honey. Maybe you should work harder." The stress began to fracture his relationship with Vanessa. She didn't sign up for a struggling man. She wanted the high life. When the credit cards started getting declined because Marcus was pouring his personal cash back into the business to keep it afloat, the argument started. "You promised me a penthouse." I heard her scream over the phone when he thought I was asleep. This dump wasn't part of the deal. Finally, the day came. Marcus walked into the living room, looking defeated. "Elena," he said, his voice devoid of emotion, "I want a divorce." I looked up from my book. I acted surprised, hurt. "Marcus, why?" "I can't do this anymore," he said. "We've grown apart. I'll be generous. I'll take the debt. You keep the car." He placed the papers on the table. I picked them up. I scanned them. It was exactly as I expected. He was claiming insolvency. He was waiving all rights to alimony if I waived all rights to his assets. He was giving me full custody of Leo because he couldn't afford child support. I looked at him. "Are you sure this is what you want?" "It's for the best," he said, avoiding my eyes. I picked up a pen. My hand didn't tremble. I signed Elena Vance. I handed the papers back to him. "You can pack your bags, Marcus. I want you out tonight." He looked surprised by my tone, but he was too relieved to argue. He grabbed a suitcase and left within the hour. He thought he had won. He thought he had escaped a sinking ship with his hidden millions intact. The next morning, the divorce was filed. The waiting period was waived due to the mutual agreement. 2 weeks later, the judge stamped the final decree. I was free. That afternoon, I drove to the Vanguard Dynamics headquarters. It was a gleaming glass building on the riverfront. I walked in, not as the cleaning lady, but as the owner. I was wearing a tailored white suit, my hair styled, my makeup flawless. David met me in the lobby with a glass of champagne. "To the Phoenix," he said, clinking his glass against mine. "To the Phoenix," I replied. I bought a condo in the Gold Coast. I enrolled Leo in the best private school in the city. I bought my mother a house with a garden. And then I waited for the inevitable. It took Marcus 3 months to realize that his hidden money was gone. When he tried to access the offshore accounts for Titan Holdings, he found them frozen. The IRS had seized everything. I had sent the USB drive to the FBI and the IRS the day the divorce was finalized. But the real blow came when he found out about me. He tracked me down to my new condo. He bribed the doorman to let him up. I opened the door to find him standing there, looking disheveled, desperate, and furious. "You!" he screamed. "You did this!" I leaned against the doorframe, sipping my tea. "Did what, Marcus?" "You won the lottery! I saw the article. The blind trust. It traces back to your mother. That money was mine. We were married." I smiled, a cold, dangerous smile. "Actually, Marcus, we were separated, and I claimed it after the paperwork was signed, but even if I hadn't, you signed a waiver. No further claims to assets known or unknown. Remember, you were so eager to protect your stolen millions that you signed away your rights to mine." He lunged at me. I stepped back, and my security guard, a massive man named Tiny, stepped out from the hallway, blocking Marcus's path. "You defrauded me!" Marcus shrieked as Tiny grabbed him by the collar. "I'll sue you. I'll take everything." "Go ahead," I said calmly. "Sue me. I'd love to play that recording of you and Vanessa in open court, the one where you call your son baggage, the one where you admit to tax fraud." Marcus went pale. You heard that?" "I heard everything, Marcus. I heard you call me a country bumpkin. I heard you call me plain. Well, look at me now. Does this look plain to you?" He was dragged away, kicking and screaming. He did try to sue me. It was the most satisfying week of my life. The courtroom was packed. Marcus's lawyer tried to paint me as a deceptive, manipulative shrew who hid assets. I sat there in my designer suit, holding my head high. When it was my turn to testify, I didn't need theatrics. My lawyer simply played the audio recording I had made that day at the office door. The entire courtroom listened in silence as Marcus's voice filled the air, cruel, arrogant, and incriminating. Then, we displayed the financial records from the USB drive. The judge, a stern woman who had clearly seen enough men like Marcus in her time, looked at him with pure disdain. Not only did she dismiss his lawsuit, but she also recommended that the district attorney press immediate charges based on the evidence of fraud presented in her courtroom. Marcus was arrested right there at the plaintiff's table. Vanessa, who was sitting in the back row, slipped out the side door and was never seen in Chicago again. Marcus was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for wire fraud, tax evasion, and embezzlement. A year later, I took Leo to the park. It was a beautiful autumn day, the leaves turning shades of fire and gold. Leo was 5 now, happy, confident, and unaware of the war his mother had fought for him. I sat on a bench, watching him chase a kite. David sat down next to me. Vanguard Dynamics was the leading architectural firm in the Midwest. We were building skyscrapers, hospitals, schools. We were building the future. "You know," David said, watching the kids play, "he still asks about me. Marcus. He sends letters from prison asking for a job when he gets out." I laughed softly. "What did you tell him?" I sent him a brochure for a welding certification course. Told him it's never too late to learn an honest trade. I looked up at the sky. It was a brilliant, aching blue. I thought about the $62 million. It had bought me this peace. Yes, it had bought safety. But it hadn't saved me. The money was just a tool. The thing that saved me was the realization that I was worth more than how I was treated. I had spent years trying to shrink myself to fit into Marcus's small, fragile ego. I had dimmed my light so he could shine, and in the end, he tried to extinguish me completely. The greatest lesson I learned wasn't about revenge, or finance, or the legal system. It was about value. Real value isn't printed on a lottery ticket. It isn't in a bank account. It's in the dignity you refuse to surrender. It's in the strength to walk away from someone who treats you like an option when you know you are a priority. Marcus lost everything not because I took it, but because he never appreciated what he had. He chased the illusion of more money, more excitement, more status, and in doing so, he lost the only things that were real. I called Leo over. He ran into my arms, smelling of wind and grass. I hugged him tight, feeling the steady beat of his heart against mine. We were safe. We were free. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't just existing, I was living. "Come on, Leo," I said, standing up and taking his hand. "Let's go get some ice cream." As we walked away, I didn't look back. There was nothing behind me worth seeing. The future was ahead, wide open and waiting, and I finally had the courage to walk into it, head held high.